Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice to see all of you here at Dharma Field. And nice to see the all-seeing eye and those of you in Zoom, hello. So this morning I'm going to give a talk that I've titled Not Even an Inch. I don't know if it's the best title for this talk, but it is a title. And it comes from an image that I'll be talking about in a moment. But one problem that we have as humans is we have a tendency to think that it's better somewhere else. I think we recognize that particular way of interpreting what it is that's showing up. We have a sense that this right here in some way is deficient. It's just not working. It's not right. Something's off about it. We think there's something that's missing. And that whatever it is that's missing from this, just somewhere else. I just have to go somewhere else. Sometimes this is something we can point to. It might be, for example, we feel dissatisfied because we never finished collecting that entire 1963 Minnesota Twins Topps baseball card collection. There's just one player left we have to get. And if we get that last card, then things are going to be a lot better. So sometimes it's something we can point to like that, and then we just go ahead and we get it. And once we got it, we forget that that was supposed to bring us great happiness, and we move on to the next thing. Sometimes it's just a feeling we have, a vague feeling we have, just that a feeling of unsettledness, of this just isn't right. And we go out looking not for the thing that's missing, but just for anything, whatever it is. I'm going to learn how to speak Chinese or whatever it is. We go do something because there's this sense that something's not quite satisfying at this moment. And again, that sense is we go elsewhere. Now I say that, but that elsewhere can be here. It can be right here. So we can be right here. And then all we got to do is improve this. We just have to improve this. I think of this as this plus. It's this plus. It's a better this than what this is. Sometimes that sense of deficiency is a sense that there's something more important going on than what's going on right now. That this is a little too trivial. There's something else that I could be doing that's more important that I should be doing. There's a story that Charlotte Joko Beck, a great Zen teacher from the 20th century, she's got this story about her Zen students and what they would do. So she was out in San Diego. And as you know, San Diego is a day where every day is, it's a place where every day is beautiful. So when there's a break from meditation, the students would go sit out on this patio. There are chairs and tables. And she said, but once the, Dharma was being spoken, then the students would rush into the meditation hall and they wouldn't push their chairs back in. So rather than just take care of this moment, just push your chair back in. There's just something more important going on. I got to hear the Dharma. I better get going. So they don't take care of what's going on. So there's a sense sometimes we have that there's something more important than this. So what I'm describing is often in Zen teachings named or defined as desiring or craving. Like this sense that something's missing. I want something that's going to help make this feel less deficient. It's going to make this feel sufficient. It's going to make me feel happy. But then there's another way that we can feel that this is deficient, and that is there can be something here that we don't want to be here. Something, again, we can point to. I don't want that thing in here right now, that yappy dog or whatever it is. And then you address the situation with going in the other room, or as my mom told me once, so I was a colicky baby, meaning that I cried, and I not only cried, but I cried with great passion. And I would do it in the middle of the night. And, this might sound familiar to some people, but my dad would not get up to see what the problem was. My mom always had to. So she decided she was just going to go sleep in the car that night. So maybe that's what you do. You just, there's someplace else you can go that you don't have to deal with what it is that's showing up. Someplace else that's not going to have this particular problem for us to face. And we're in summer. I've been on a few of these myself. We know vacation can sometimes be that. Like, I just want to leave that behind and I want to go here and have bliss. But if that is nagging enough, yes, you're thinking about that while you're sitting here. And maybe it's that, whatever it is, chopping block that when the vacation is over, the day before you got to go back, now you go, oh yeah, I still got that thing, I got to go back. We think we can go somewhere else. And sometimes, again, that somewhere else is right here. And we think we can just improve this moment. Knock it off, right? Whatever it is we think we can do, that we can just fix this. And this is often described or named aversion in Buddhist teachings, or hatred, or anger. Now, I know those aren't synonymous words, aversion, hatred, or anger, but they're often used to talk about that sense of whatever it is that's here, I don't want it. I want it to be away. Now, I'd say all of this not in a sense to, not to give any sense that this is wrong. So none of what I just said is wrong. That you're here and you feel this is deficient, you try to go someplace to fix it. None of that is wrong. This is not a judgment. It's just an observation. This is what we do. And I would invite all of you to just see how often this sense of the deficiency of now arises in our life, and how there's some other thing that could be happening right now, some other place we can go that we think is going to help address what it is that's not satisfying for us in this moment. We can just notice when this feels deficient, when it feels like we can go someplace else, in a manner of speaking. And when we do that, then we can start perhaps to get sensitive to how this sense that this is deficient, there's someplace else, even if that someplace else is just this plus, that there's someplace else that we can go, that this is rooted in the idea that there actually is someplace else, that there is someplace other than here. This one's a little harder for us to see, because this is how we live our life. We just, of course, there's someplace other than here. I just go out in the other room. So we're confusing what here is actually referring to, because when you're in the other room, where are you? You're here. I mean, you're here in the other room, but you're here. No matter where you go, to kind of paraphrase a quote that I first encountered in Buckaroo Banzai, but no matter where you go, here you are. And that one is no matter where you go, there you are. It's no matter where you go, here you are. Here you are. It's never not going to be here. And you can start to notice, if you start just looking at how often this is insufficient, this is lacking something, or this has something I don't want, there's someplace else I can go, how this is rooted in that idea that there's some other place or some other time other than here, other than now. And when we think that, then we have difficulties hearing, and I'm going to draw this image that I first encountered from Dinan Katagiri in a book, Returning to Silence. But when we think there's someplace else, we have difficulties hearing the silence of this being here, this being now. We have difficulties hearing the silence of this. And that doesn't mean no noise. So that dog barking isn't ruining the silence I'm talking about. The silence I'm talking about, the dog barking, is an expression of that silence. And we can actually hear the silence of any sound that arises. It's the silence of this. It's a silence of always here, always now. And you can taste that if you just stop and pause for a moment. You can taste it. You can taste that silence. So settling into this moment, then we can realize, or again, just get a taste or a glimpse of that silence. But here's the deal about that silence is even if we don't settle into this moment, even if we keep thinking there's someplace else or some other place we go, it's going to make itself known. The silence is going to make itself known to us, but it'll have a very distinct flavor to it. So if we're just bringing our attention back here, we're just settling into this silence. It can feel peaceful, especially right now, if there's nothing at stake for us. We're just sitting here. But if we're still caught up in, as we often are from moment to moment, caught up in the sense that there's someplace else, and silence makes itself known to us and makes us stare right at it, it has a different flavor. It's not, oh, this is nice. It's more like, ugh. And I've got a description of this from Returning to Silence. Katagiri talks about this. And this is where the title of my talk comes from. He says, the opportunity to experience real silence occurs when we have been driven into a corner and simply cannot move an inch. This seems like a situation of complete despair, but this silence is quite different from despair, because in the area of despair, the conscious flame of human desire is still burning. But real silence is the state of existence that passes through this desire. So he says the opportunity to experience real silence occurs when we have been driven into a corner and simply cannot move an inch. That's what I'm saying. So we can settle into this, we can taste that silence, but we often have problems settling into this. And silence will make itself known to us because we're going to get to a point where we're driven into a corner. Life is going to seem to drive us into a corner where there's nothing we can do. What is showing up is what is showing up. That doesn't mean we can't take care of what's showing up, but it does mean that this is it. And that's what, when we think there's someplace else, we think, well, this isn't really it. I could just go over there. Then I could have the happiness or the thisness that I want, this plus. But when we really realize there's no place to go, sometimes we're driven there. It could be something very serious in our life that has driven us into this corner. Now we can't move an inch, and there's that silence. But it feels like despair because we want to do something. We want to be able to address this. If someone has driven us into a corner, we want to get out of there. That's a terrible feeling to be driven into a corner and you can't move an inch. So we feel that despair, but you see what's showing up there? We driven into that corner. We just want not to be driven into a corner. So what's happening is that desire is for what is showing up to be other than it is. That's where the despair is actually coming from. It's not actually that sense that we can't move an inch. I would argue, Katagiri says we can experience silence when we've been driven into a corner and simply cannot move an inch. I would add to that we can realize that that's every moment. Every moment is we're in a corner and we can't move an inch. That's every moment we can't, maybe not that sense we're driven into a corner, but we're just right here. We can't move an inch. Where else are we going to go? Like I said, no matter where you go, here you are. Where are you going to go from here? No matter how much you don't like it, what's showing up is what's showing up. You know what I mean? Like it's right here, right now. What are you going to do about it? So we feel despair, as Katagiri puts it, when we think that we can get away from this, when we desire this to be some other way. But as he says, real silence is a state of human existence that passes through this despair. I'll talk a little bit about that passing through despair in a few minutes. But before I do, I just want to point out in Zazen, this is right now what I'm talking about is our formal sitting meditation practice. In Zazen, we can see our despair. Or, and sometimes despair, excuse me, sometimes despair sounds like a really strong word. And Katagiri is talking about those moments when it feels like despair, because that's when you finally stop thinking there's someplace else to go and you really pay attention. But in Zazen, in our meditation, our formal meditation practice, we can see that despair, we can see that sense of deficiency with great clarity. And when we do that, then we can actually have the opportunity to see through our despair. Now, how is that? Well, when you're sitting in meditation in this formal practice, you are it's very clear to you that there's no place to go. Here we are. I mean, the posture of the sitting practice is designed to help you to see there's nowhere to go. The sitting posture we take is stable. Unless we're not sitting properly, then it could be all over. I helped somebody earlier today who I saw was just kind of, and once we do that, then we get all kinds of backaches and this, that, and the other thing. We can't really pay attention again to the silence because we're so busy not wanting something to be showing up, our sore back or, whatever it is that's going on. But if we're in this stable posture, and the other thing we do is we're facing a wall. Not only are we facing a wall, we're usually just like, I don't know, about that far from it. Where are you going to go? Even if you think you can go somewhere, you're going to hit that wall pretty soon, right? So our sitting practice helps us to see there's no place to go. It's just built into the practice. We also see there's nothing to do because that's the practice. It's just, there's nothing to do. There's no movement you're being asked to do. There's no place you're being asked to go, either mentally or physically. You're just, this is it. And just be aware. That's it. That's not a lot. So you have an opportunity in sitting to start to realize when this doesn't seem sufficient and there's someplace else to go. And where are we going? Oh, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch today. Oh, are there still grapes in the refrigerator? Really nice seeing my Uncle Steve yesterday. I do have an Uncle Steve. Pretty nice guy. I should see him more. You can do that while you're sitting. What are you doing? What are you doing right there? Well, you're just going somewhere else. This is not sufficient. This is just sitting, staring at a wall. There are more important things you could be doing, or there's this, like I said, kind of a vague sense of discomfort that you have sitting there. Boredom. That's the way it really can really show up. Boredom. But it could be all kinds of things. You might have a little twinge or something. Then you check out. You start latching on to ideas that you have, something that'll just take you away from this. So in our formal meditation practice and in Zazen, when we're sitting, we have an opportunity really to see with clarity that sense of deficiency and that sense, even if it's just a little tickle of that despair, of the fact that this is not the way it's supposed to be. I don't want it to be like this. But again, when we're just sitting facing a wall, the stakes seem so low that we usually don't go, I'm in despair. Now, you could be if something else is going on in your life, because what we do is let's say we make meaning out of what appears in our life. I was going to say we blame our life, but we do blame our life. We go, if that wasn't happening right now, I'd be a lot happier, right? So we will do that as well. So despair can show up there, whatever it is. It's just that sense that there's someplace else I can go, that I can move an inch, that I'm not in a corner and I can't move an inch. There's someplace else I can go. Daydreaming is part of that. Nodding off to sleep when you're sitting Zazen. That's another version of that. So when you start, sometimes people are like, I had my little spate of that at some point when I started practice. And so we can do Zazen. So Zazen is really just fully living this moment. right here, right now, what it is, what this is, just fully living this, fully facing what's showing up and just fully living this moment. And we do this in life. So Zazen, we do say Zazen is not simply this sitting posture, but the sitting posture, because there's nothing to do, because there's no place to go, literally. I mean, in the most just fundamental, like shallow understanding, it's just right there in it. But in a deeper understanding, it's right there in it. And that we can take into our daily life. So we can do Zazen washing the dishes. I know we use this example, but driving your car, whatever it is that you're doing, you can do Zazen because that's where we are. Driving the car. That's where we are. Washing the dishes. There's no place else to go. If we think there's someplace else to go, I don't know, if you're sitting at the kitchen sink washing the dishes, you're not taking a shower. At least I hope you're not taking a shower. So you're just there, taking care of that. There's no place else to go, and there's nothing else to do, because otherwise you wouldn't be washing the dishes. So we can do this in our daily life, but you can see how in our daily life, it seems to be a bit more complicated than we're sitting in a meditation hall. We're just sitting, facing a wall, sitting, doing nothing. In our daily life, we've got things to do. We have goals, perhaps, like, I don't know, I need to get these dishes washed, and I don't want to harp on washing dishes, but it's the example I gave. I got to do this in 10 minutes because I got to be somewhere. Or I have to be really careful with this. This is like a really thin glass. The last time we had a set of these, I shoved the sponge into the glass so hard that it broke the glass, right? So I have to be careful with this one. Oh, this one is, so it seems more complicated to us. And to be honest, that's the way life is. Everyday life, stuff is showing up, and it seems so complicated, and that's where we get caught up. We get caught up and we think, as we're getting caught up, I really don't want this to be happening right now. This really shouldn't be happening right now. Or I really like this. And this is another way that it can show up for us. But of course, that's not a sense of, we don't see that as clearly a sense of dissatisfaction. It actually is. I really like this. I'm going to hang on to it because we know it's going to go away. We know that all things that show up go away. It's just their nature. So even wanting to hang on to some, I guess I could have edited my talk there. Anything that shows up, we try to hang on to, same thing, same sense of dissatisfaction, that if this is starting to fade, is not what's going on here. So everyday life seems to be more complicated. It's just harder for us to see. And that is where despair arises. Katagiri actually tells us, he says, how can we experience the silence after he's talked about passing through the despair? He goes, how can we experience the silence? Without everyday life, it is impossible to experience silence. That's because it's an everyday life that we despair. And it's an everyday life that we despair because it's an everyday life that we get caught up in our ideas about what's showing up. And then we're dissatisfied and we think there's someplace else we can go. And where can those seeming complications be reduced? Well, in our sitting meditation, which I'm going to point out, if you actually have a sitting meditation practice, is part of your everyday life. So if you make it part of your everyday life, it's part of your everyday life. That makes sense. We have another practice that's related to Zazen. It's actually just more of it. I'll just say it's more Zazen. It's Sesshin. It's our meditation retreats. Though we don't use the word retreat too often at Dharma Field, because retreat seems to be saying, well, I'm going to leave the world behind right now. That world's complicated. I'm going to go to retreat and retreat from the world and really focus on this, that, or the other thing. But our meditation, the sesshins, are actually engagement with life. They are awareness that you can't move an inch. They are seeing through that despair. So we don't usually call them retreats. Sometimes we do just so people know what we're talking about. Because if you hear that word sesshin or sesshin, if you hear that word, what does that mean? But it's a very important part of Zen practice. And what sesshin basically is it's zazen for a long time, for a really long time, to the point where you give up thinking that there's an inch to move. It takes us to that point where we give up on the belief we have that we can move an inch. That's what it is. So what we do in sesshin is we sit a lot for 1, 2, 3, 5 days, 4 days, I guess is in there too. I could have just said 1 to 5 days. Here at Dharma Field, we go up to 5 days. And that isn't all sitting. We also do walking meditation, which those of you who come on daily sittings maybe do walking meditation with us. We do work meditation. We do eating meditation. So everything we do in sesshin is meditation, just as it can be in our everyday life. And again, if sesshin is something you do, it's part of your everyday life. So here you are doing this in your everyday life. So what we find at sesshin is maybe at the beginning, we try to negotiate with the situation at hand. Here we are sitting, and we try to negotiate with. There's all kinds of ways we negotiate with it. It could just simply be this. We go, okay, this is the first day. I have 2 sittings, and then we get to have breakfast, and then there's going to be a break. And then after the break, we have 2 sittings? No, 1 sitting, and then there's a talk, and sometimes a talk goes on. Yeah, and you go and you start going through the whole. This, of course, is if you have the schedule memorized, which I'm going to say right now when I started. I memorized the schedule so that I could do that, so that I could sit there and go, okay, 2 more sittings to go. And then I could, I did that rather than just trusted, put my faith in the unfolding of the day. So that's one way we negotiate, is we start planning the whole day out and thinking about our ability to get through all of that. And at some point you go, wow, yeah, well, I'm halfway through. Let's see, you got up at this, the first sitting was this. The day's half over. This is great, So we negotiate that way. Sometimes when we're sitting, you know how it is. You sit and maybe you're sitting in the wrong position. It starts to hurt a little bit. Or maybe you've just been sitting for a while, it starts to hurt a little bit. So you start to negotiate this way. You go, okay, I know it has to be 25 minutes into the sitting. It just has to be. That means there's only 5 minutes left. I can do that without moving. I can make it this last 5 minutes without, or you go, yeah, this is 5 minutes in. There's no way I'm going to make it through. Then you just move, right? And you just start moving. So whatever it is, you negotiate with what is it's showing up. And again, our negotiations are just, how do we make this plus? How do we go somewhere other than here? But with sesshin, one of the things that's important about sesshin is after a while, it's just too much. You just get exhausted trying to negotiate with what's showing up. You just get exhausted. After a while, you just stop trying to figure out what sitting period you're in and how many are left, and talking about whether or not, if you're feeling pain, after a while, if you're not negotiating and you're really in pain, you just move. You don't have to go through all that negotiation. You're just living with what it is that's showing up rather than trying to negotiate it. That's what sesshin does. It actually backs you into a corner. It gets you to the point where you stop trying to do all the things that you've trained yourself to do to not be here. Thinking, again, that you can't be here. Thinking that you can move an inch. And what you start to realize, as we think, oh, I could never sit in meditation for 3 days. I can't even do it for 10 minutes. That's really hard. And we think that being here is the challenge, that is the difficulty. What you start to realize in sesshin is that it's trying not to be here that's exhausting. It's trying not to be here that is actually the source fueling our sense of deficiency. It's trying not to be here that despair arises. Not in being here, no matter how difficult it is at showing up, it's wanting it not to be here and trying to make this plus that is actually difficult. So in sesshin, as we start to give up our negotiations with what has shown up, and we just start to take care of what it is that's showing up instead. So not trying to be somewhere else, but fully be here. Then we can hear the silence. You can see how that's moving through that despair. Again, even if you wouldn't call it despair, it's despair in the sense if we really see what's going on. It's anything other than this. We start to see through that. We can start to hear that silence that Katagiri is describing. So Sesshin, you'll see on our flyers, and Jed, do we have a flyer out there now? They'll say collecting the mind on it. And collecting the mind is what Sesshin is. We're not collecting anything. It's just it's this. You know, when we bow in the meditation hall, we put our hands together. There's that sense of just collecting our mind. And I don't know if you notice that, just coming to Dharma Field or coming to a meditation hall. And so you're at home and you're doing where do I put my keys? And I'm getting really bad about that now. I'm to the point where I have to put things by the door that I exit out of, and I still walk right past it. So you have to be really careful. But so yeah, we got all this stuff just distracting us. And then we get in the car and then we start to collect ourselves a little bit, partly because we're going to have to drive, but partly we're starting to head to the meditation center. Then you get to the building and you're collected even more. You start to be in the building, you get inside, and rarely it happens, but rarely do you just kick your shoes off and make all kinds of noise. You go, there are people meditating here, right? So you be attentive, you collect yourself. Then you enter the Zendo, you put your hands together. There, you bow. All of this is collecting the mind, and that's the shit. Because from moment to moment, there's somewhere else we can go, somewhere else we can go. We can bring our hands in Gasho. And that's Sesshin. Because again, what Sesshin does is it's long enough that you start to realize there's no place for it to go. Sesshin, in a way, backs you into a corner. Now, I'm talking about Sesshin in part. It is an important part of our practice. And I think that the sense that we have of being able to move an inch is really a problem that we have. And it's one that's with us all the time. I mean, it's going to step out of this room, you go, I got what he's talking about. It's going to be there. Just be attentive. Again, it's not about being right or wrong. It's not that you should not think you could move an inch or think that this should be better. It's rather just observe when it's showing up. Observe when you're living out of, I can move an inch, mind. But in part, I'm bringing this up because we have a Sesshin coming up in September. And it's September 7th through the 10th. So it starts at Thursday night at 7 o'clock. And it ends Sunday at about 5:30. So it ends up being 3 full days. And we have 3 different options for people. We have the full 3-day, which would be, again, Thursday night through Sunday. We have a 2-day option that would start Friday night. And then we have a 1-day option that would start on Saturday night and go through Sunday. And I would really encourage you to think about sitting Sesshin, because I do think it's an important part of practice because it helps you to see what's really going on. It helps you to see through that despair, through that sense of deficiency just by its form. It's like our sitting posture. It can help us to see we can't move an inch. Sesshin is that, but it's longer, so it just keeps reminding us, keeps bringing us, shows us how often we drift away and think we can move an inch. But if we really want to see through that despair, if we really want to hear that silence, we have to first see we can't move an inch. And like I said, whether we sit and do this of our own accord or whether life just hits us and we suddenly realize we can't move an inch, there's going to be points in your life where you realize that is the nature of this. And it does not have to be despairing. This can actually be instead the sense of freedom that, here it is, no matter how difficult this is. And it can be difficult. But difficult doesn't mean it has to be despairing. That comes from thinking, holding on to the idea that there's someplace else for us, desiring for this to be different. than it is. So that's where I'm going to pause for questions or comments. And just to let you know, if you are interested in registering for the session, there are registration forms out in the coat room and also on our website. So easy to do. If that's it, thank you so much for your attention.